All right, how's it going? My name's Matt Barr. You're listening to the Looking Sideways Action Sports podcast, the show where I look into the most fascinating stories in action sports and other related endeavours. Thank you for tuning into this episode. Hope you enjoy it. If you're one of the many new listeners that I've picked up over the last few weeks, then welcome. Nice to have you here. All right, this week's guest is a very close friend of mine. It's Lauren MacCallum. Lauren's a writer, broadcaster and activist who I've known for a few years now. She is, as you're going to see, a great conversationalist, someone with very interesting ideas on a wide range of topics. And she's somebody I've been meaning to get on the show for a while now. Now, originally I was going to chat to her for Type 2, the podcast that I do with Patagonia. Indeed, I did a Type 2 live with her at the height of the lockdown on my own and the Patagonia Europe channels. But for the main event, I thought I'd bring her onto the main podcast so we could have the type of freewheeling, no-stone-unturned conversation a force of nature like Lauren really requires. Lauren's got a considered, compassionate view of activism and also progressiveness in general, I'm going to say. She's somebody I always really enjoy talking to when I need some perspective, really. We chat fairly frequently and chatted this week, actually, for various reasons we get into in the podcast. Yeah, so when we'd done that, I thought, you know what, let's get her on and continue our ongoing conversation on here, which is what we did. So there's loads to get stuck into on this one, including an account of Lauren's route into the industry. And above all, that aforementioned, considered, compassionate, those words again, view of community and activism in general. I mean, it's one of the things that struck me over the last few weeks. One of the things we discussed in our conversation is just how, I'm going to be polite, underdeveloped the conversation is around any type of political issue, really, in outdoor and action sports. You've got people denying that privilege even exists and then showing with their very, again, I'm going to be generous, unformed thoughts that it very much does exist. As I've said at various points in various conversations I've had over the last few weeks, it isn't as if these concepts and ideas haven't been extensively pored over and debated for literally hundreds of years. But what's clear is that the majority of our community is grappling with it all very publicly for the very first time, and that the leaders you might expect to, well, lead on this are among the most unsure of where to start. Now, Lauren's experience and insights make her the type of non-judgemental and progressive leader I think we do need at this time, which comes across very clearly in our conversation and is exactly why I got her on the podcast. She's also fucking funny. The line, I can't change the world if I think it's run by fucking lizards, is already one of my favourite ever Looking Sideways quotes. Sorry about the swear words there, especially if you've got it on in the car with the kids. Anyway, going to leave it there. I'll be back at the end for Housekeeping Corner. Promise it isn't as long as last week. But in the meantime, here's me and Lauren. Compassionate Revolution. Enjoy. We're on.
We're on.
This is it. It's happening.
I know. Who'd have thought?
After all the conversations, after all the hype, after me putting you off last night because I was too tired, which is nice to be able to do when it's a friend, rather than, like I said, have to be the whole like podcast presenter guy, you know. Here we are. How you doing?
Here we are. Yeah, good. I mean, I went for a little swim this morning. So yeah, enjoying the little cold water dips, which is quite nice. But yeah, just something that's just started doing like the last kind of couple of weeks there, just because it's been pretty nuts, last couple of weeks. So,
are you doing them every morning? Are you getting up like super early and getting in?
Yeah, like not like super early, like 6 a.m, but yeah, trying to leave here around about 7ish, and then
right,
quick duke, and then in and out, and back at the desk for 8:30 or whatever. So
are you buying into the whole, you know, like rise fierce, mental health, like cold water immersion, Wim Hof?
Not really. Like,
because it's a proper thing, isn't
yeah.
it? You know, like the
yeah.
I mean, I'm a big proponent of it.
Like,
Because I think it works for me. Like to get in the water, definitely.
Yeah, like I totally don't deny any of it or whatever, but it wasn't like my main sort of reason to get into it. I guess like in the summer I've just enjoyed cycling around and going for cold dips, or like, you know, either on the road bike or mountain bike, and it's just kind of turned into this like, yeah, the full frontal float club.
Nice. So, and where are you going? Is it in Aviemore?
Yeah, so I live in Aviemore, in the Highlands, as you know. So just been going to Morlich, which is the one that's the bottom of Cairngorm, a bit, and then just some other lochs around here. But Morlich's quite good because it's quite sandy, so you can be in and out, and it's less of a faff of a walk in or whatever. So yeah.
No, I think I know the what. Yeah, it's like where you drive up. It's on the right, isn't it? And there's the camping. There's little camper van berths, and yeah, I know exactly where it is. Yeah, nice. It must be cold though, right?
Yes, it's totally freezing. It's so cold, but it's good. And like, I think the sort of beauty, and I'm never really been one of these like, you know, anti-tourist people, but I guess it's one of the things that's come out of coronavirus is, you know, usually right now we'd be full swing tourism mode. You know, Aviemore would be bursting at the seams, but because tourism, which is a vital lifeline for the Highlands, really is just non-existent. It's dead. It's completely dead. So yeah, skinny dips at 7 a.m. or
all right, suddenly it's on. You can do it.
You can do it without people like cooking their breakfast, staring at you.
Yeah, going like, "Who's this? Put it away, love."
Yeah, totally.
So how is that being taken in the community, this obviously unprecedented / unusual / unprecedented / unusual period of history that we're living through?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's
I'm definitely overusing that gag. I should probably stop making that same joke every episode.
I mean, it's true, right? It's just unprecedented discomfort.
It's definitely unprecedented. Yeah. That's the word you keep hearing a lot.
Yeah, unprecedented. I mean, I think a lot of people are nervous. A lot of people are pretty stressed out. I mean, furlough has seemed to help a lot of people, but there's a lot of people that have kind of fallen through the cracks here. So, I'd say, people are just generally nervous, and I think that's quite a sort of common feeling. But also, I guess people just try to take it day by day and do things like going out on their bike and taking advantage of trails that are empty and lochs that are deserted. So yeah, I guess some people are enjoying being at this time of year where it's where it's usually hoaching to being pretty dead. But I think people are ready for things to open back up again because no one's making any money. Everyone's pretty nervous, So yeah, I think everyone's kind of looking forward to getting back to normality, really. Like, I'm pretty sure most of us are.
On the bright side, though, no better time to be the author of the definitive guide to travelling in Scotland, as you are. So surely, because it's officially the year of the staycation.
Yeah.
So, how's book sales?
Well, actually, you get in touch with them. I just ordered like 100 books because off the publisher before this happened, and I was like, oh great. Which is actually quite funny because I buy them more expensive off the publisher than Amazon sell them. So I've got this like big bill to pay. But I mean, the kind of bright side 2 months later or something is that this is gonna be the year of staycation. So hopefully people use Hidden Scotland as as a guide to inspiration to exploring their back garden. So yeah, I mean, was initially shitting it, but now it might turn out all right.
Was that the worst deadline of your life?
That was like genuinely one of the worst deadlines ever of my whole entire life.
Yeah, I wrote a guidebook in 2005, like a snowboarding guidebook, and that was comfortably the most stressful work deadline of my entire life. Like the amount of work involved in doing one of those things, just because obviously there's so many facts to check.
Oh my god!
And so many typos you can sprinkle around a 300-page book.
I knew you were going to bring that up. Yeah, I mean...
Hey, that wasn't a dig at your time. Oh, there's Matt going on about the typos again.
Yeah, I mean... yeah, well, I think you've seen me. We were in Norway together, right? That must have been...
just over a year ago.
Yeah, just over a year ago.
April, wasn't it, 2019?
Yeah, it was March, because my birthday. So it was March 2019. And yeah, well, you've seen me. I was just like, just totally burnt out. I was trying to manage the charity, film a new film with Patagonia, and write a book, and just generally function as a human, and definitely bit off like far too much that I could chew. And also, I'm massively dyslexic as well, so writing for me takes a really, really long time. I'm not a quick writer. Like, when you see these articles or whatever, like hours and hours have gone into that. And I also think the style of writing really short. You
have to be really concise, don't you?
Yeah, you've got to be super concise, get to the point, but describe it and make it sound appealing, or whatever the special characteristics that you're shouting about it for. In like 125 characters or something, 150 words in each section. So yeah, kind of.
Oh, it's super good discipline. Like it really, that process, by the end of it, you can bang it out. You can bang that stuff out. Like, and you can be that concise. You can get to the point. I think a fast track to kind of concise, considered writing there's nothing better. It's just extremely stressful, as you say.
Yeah, I got into this really weird method where like I'm quite a night owl, so like sitting up until like 1, 2, 3 in the morning. But I got this really weird technique where I would set a timer for. I obviously had this list of places that I've chosen out, like 300 places, whatever. And so I had all the entries written out, and I've chosen and kind of researched on this Google sheet. I would set a timer for 25 minutes, and I would try and write as much as I could about that 25 minutes. And when the timer went off, I would stop and move on to the next one, and like would write.
Oh, that's actually a technique, isn't it? There's yeah, it's got a really weird name. I'm going to look it up, in fact.
Yeah,
because there's this whole industry based around not being distracted on the internet now. And there's like because obviously doing any kind of, they call it like deep work, don't they, in the cheesy American sort of self-help way. It's like there's a book called Deep Work. The whole idea that pre-internet it was a lot easier to do, I'm using the inverted commas, obviously, deep work, because you could concentrate more. Because obviously the theory being that the internet, again, not an original observation, has scrambled everyone's brains to the point that it's actually really hard to concentrate for any extended period of time. So when you try to do something like write a book, it's really difficult because you end up just checking the internet, and it's a real thing. It sounds so trivial, doesn't it? But so there's like bookshelves of stuff been written about this, and then there's whole genres of like podcasts and stuff about it. And this technique, which I've just looked it up, is called the Pomodoro technique.
Well, there you go.
Time management technique. The technique uses a timer to break down work into intervals, traditionally 25 minutes in length, separated by short breaks using a timer. And the idea is that that's like the only. So Charlie Brooker uses that to write whatever it's called, Black Mirror, and there's apps you can buy. There's one called Freedom, which I've actually got, that literally disables your phone and computer, so you can't look at anything other than what you're working on. So if you've got a Word document up, you can put a timer on. It's fucking ludicrous, isn't it? But like it is. That's funny that you that worked for you, because it is a proper thing. Is my point,
Yeah. Well, I would like to think that it was that considered and whatever thought through, but it wasn't. It was just out of pure stress. And having to just bash it out and just like fucking get on with it. Like stop like looking at it. You just go, and then come back and refine. So yeah. And then I kind of worked out for myself that like 25 minutes was the optimum time. 15 minutes was too short.
Yeah.
Like, and then so there you go.
I mean, it's funny that you say you're a night owl, and that was what was working best for you. Because when I did the first book that we did, that was when I really realised that I can only really work early in the morning. So I was like getting up at 5 and sitting down at 5:30 and just try to do like 2-3 hours work before then. And before that, I'd not really consciously realised that that's how my brain worked best. But you know, when you've got that kind of deadline stress, and you just, like you say, you've got to do it, you've got to find a way of getting it out there, haven't you? And that's a habit that I've kept to basically ever since, you know, kind of realised. So I was trying to get you to do this podcast so early, and you were like, nah mate, you're all right.
Yeah. We're mates and all, but I'm not getting out of bed.
I was like, brilliant, I can finally get someone to get up early so we can do it really early. You're like, no way.
No, mate. But yeah, big up Sam Mellish as well, taking the photos for the book. So that was, I think that was the connection there. So.
Yeah. Sam's like an unsung
legend,
like creative hero, isn't he? You know, he just does so many amazing creative projects that get attention. But I you know, for me, he's like a true creative, because he just gets these ideas, you know, whether it's the football documentary stuff that he does, whether it's the GB Park and Pipe stuff that he did, whether it's these guidebooks. You know, he did his thing about like UK roadside culture, and it's just all done out of curiosity and creative interest. And then he does it, and then he'll find a way of getting it out there, and then he'll get it out there, and then he just moves on to the next thing.
Yeah.
And he clearly isn't motivated by anything other than the curiosity about the subject. I think that's just brilliant, because, you know, he's quietly, over the last decade, amassed this really impressive body of work, hasn't he? Yeah,
and he's just such a pleasure of a guy to work with, really, and just so simple. And I think when you're working about something that's like, you know, you're massively putting out there, and obviously creatively for him as well with the photos, but, you know, the photos really have to match the words. So, yeah, big up to Sam. It was, pleasure, even though in the midst of it.
So you just mentioned, you know, we talked about the book, you mentioned the charity, which is Protect Our Winters, obviously. I think what's really interesting is, you know, what you kind of, your career is like the reality of having a career in this industry, isn't it? You have to do like loads of different things, and you have to be prepared to try things that can put you very much out of your comfort zone. Like, you know, like doing a book, or like throwing yourself into the charity work that you've done. How's that been? Yeah. Like, because I think when you know, one of the things I get asked a lot on here from listeners is like, oh, how'd you get a job in the industry? You know, like, how does it work? And I think there can sometimes be this idea that it's like quite a structured thing, and it's actually the opposite, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, I think everybody that has managed to carve out some kind of role in this very odd little world that we all work in very quickly learns that you have to be really adaptable, and you have to be prepared to do loads of different things, really. So how are you finding that? Because you, like I say, you kind of like really typify that with all the different things that all the different hats that you're currently wearing, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, so there's times where, you know, it works really well. And there's times where, you know, it hasn't worked really well. Like when you see me in Norway, probably, I'm just thinking about that time, because I was just so stressed out. Like,
you didn't seem that stressed.
Like, yeah, I'm quite good at like covering it with like jokes and, you know, whatever.
Booze.
Yeah, and booze. Although I've not been boozing that much, but yeah, like, and you know, being that kind of that caricature of like that mad Scottish bastard that, you know, like that. I guess is kind of fun to have around or whatever. But yeah, I think sometimes under that, it's just like the brain is just constantly, you know, ticking and going. But yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting. Like, I didn't really come into the industry in kind of air quotes, because I never kind of thought of it like that until I was kind of like much later, you know. Like, I started working at a skate park when I was 19, and before that I was like, wanted to be a professional golfer.
I did not know that.
So
wow.
Yeah, I was in the Scottish golf team, and like was super.
I did not know that. Wow, that's amazing. Right, hang on.
Yeah.
Back up.
I was wondering if I was going to be able to like skim over that or not.
No way we skimming over that. That's brilliant. Well, I guess, you know, it's obviously home of golf, right?
Yeah, it's the home of golf, and we I was born in Vancouver to Scottish parents, and when we came back, we moved beside this sort of like local course, and just all the boys were playing golf, and I was like, well, I want to do outside shit, and hang out with them. So I just started playing golf, and I was like 12, I think, and yeah, just kind of made mates for life, and it taught me a lot of like discipline, and was just really good fun. I was just didn't really think about the whole class thing that's associated with golf or whatever. I was just out having a good time, like for hours and hours and hours and hours, just with mates. But what was really cool was like through all of that, when you're 14 years old or 15 years old and you're paired with like old Dottie who's 71 in the ladies medal, like you're gonna have to like think about something. You're gonna have to come up with something in common pretty fucking quickly to talk about, or it's gonna be a boring 4 hours. So it kind of taught me to like, I guess, like hold lots of different conversations and find things in common with people like super quickly. And then I was in a really fortunate position that I got a golf scholarship for my last three years of school. And yeah, it was kind of with the Scottish golf team, and then I think, as I kind of got a bit older, like 18, the realization that my parents were, I would say they didn't kind of become, I don't know what you would call it, but, middle class into the sort of, later 40s with the oil and gas boom in the northeast, and, that they didn't have endless pockets of money to just throw at me to go to tour school, which is like 15 grand just to try. It's a horrendous amount of money. And so I think the realization of that, of me not making it, and then, putting my family through some sort of like financial turmoil was kind of sinking in, and I was just looking for something completely different. And I'd always kind of like watch surf movies and watch snowboard movies, like, I remember when Channel 419 on Sky, it was like the Extreme Channel, like watching Drop Stitch and like Leslie and Josie, and like obviously had no idea who they were, like, and
right.
And just watching like, Drop Stitch on TV, and then, whatever, being like, holy shit, that looks cool. Like totally, that looks like, golf's literally got a rule book. Like it's literally got a thick rule book. I mean, like, well, yeah, doesn't look like it's got a rule book. Looks pretty fun. And yeah, so I always was quite interested in it, and then started skating at Transition Extreme in Aberdeen. And yeah, Mike Hume, Steve Dogg, all those guys taught me how to skate. Girls' night and Monday night, and like it was just amazing. Like I kind of felt like I found my people, like I was like, holy shit, this is like where this is the sort of conversations and the outlook on life that I've been looking for like my whole, I guess, teenage years. And yeah, I guess I hung around so much that they eventually offered me a job.
Right. Okay.
And yeah, and then I guess that's kind of where it all started, really. Like getting into the sort of industry.
But like you say, wasn't really like, hey, I'm going to get a job in the industry. It's just the way these things evolve, isn't it? It's from there you start, like you say, meeting people, getting your network, understanding the culture.
Yeah.
And kind of the more opportunities arise, right? If you approach it in the right spirit, I would say.
And I think like just meeting people, you've got to remember, like in my latter years of life, I was my teenage years of school life, I was educated in this massively privileged upper class environment, and
a public school, basically.
Yeah.
Which one?
Loretto.
Okay. Where's that?
It's just outside Edinburgh, so it's Musselburgh.
So is that kind of like, is it Fetties? Is that
Yeah,
another
so
famous
like
one?
Fetties.
Gordonston for boys. Is it like that kind of thing?
Yeah, so like your sort of big I would say Eton of the North, or
Yeah,
Fetties,
probably
Loreto, Glen
probably
Ammond.
probably important to say to non-British listeners that public school in the UK in that context actually means a very private school.
Yeah.
Like the most exclusive schools, like you say, in the country. And as you just pointed out, like Eton, kind of like traditionally the ruling class go to Eton, don't they?
Yeah.
And the whole British cabinet right now all went to Eton.
Yeah.
So like you say, it's like that super privileged sector of British society, isn't it?
Yeah. It's where, and the best way. One of the producers actually that I started working with last year, BBC Scotland, I'm sure we'll come to that. But he was educated in that sort of similar setting in his latter years of life, and because I got the golf scholarship, it was financially accessible for me because my fees were paid. And my parents, I think, because I had a lot of these learning difficulties, were like, right, you're going, like whether you like it or not, And I think aspirationally for my parents who grew up in the west of Scotland was not many opportunities. That for them was like, that.
Yeah,
that was a huge thing for them. Being able to send me there or have those opportunities. And anyways, he described it. It's like, when you're educated, because I went to Allen Academy till I was 15 or 16. There you're taught, one day one of you might become prime minister. One day, one of you might be clever enough and smart enough and have these leadership skills or whatever. You might become prime minister one day. But the difference in these schools is that you're taught you will become prime minister one day. It's not a matter of, it's not a matter of if that's going to happen. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of who. And that difference, that entitlement, that the sort of ruling class that you're calling about is that's the sort of difference, I would say.
Yeah, well, it's the kind of, me and Phil Young in our last episode, we talked about British exceptionalism as a concept, and it's kind of built in there, isn't it?
Oh, totally.
Like that your personal exceptionalism is an extension of that as well, and one of the lines I really liked about the Dominic Cummings thing that was doing the rounds was like, finally the British know what it's like to be ruled by the British. Because like that's that thing, isn't it? That kind of, and it's always perennially been talked about, the idea that ruling class is essentially responsible for all the divisions and issues in the country. It's kind of a simplistic take, but it does get talked about a lot. So is that what you meant when you said you found your people?
Yeah.
Like that you would, and you also mentioned class when you mentioned golf, which is kind of interesting because it's the first thing that you said was like, you mentioned the class association with golf.
Yeah.
So it kind of kind of gives an impression of not being entirely comfortable in that that world.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I didn't really feel it, and also just massively, whether they like it or not, just call them out, massively sexist. Like, how can my dad take our family spaniel into the clubhouse but not his own daughter? Like when the family dog's got more rights than I do, like it doesn't look too good, guys. You know what I mean? So I guess I wasn't massively comfortable there, and so when the dream of becoming this LPGA tour professional was over, I was really looking for that sense of community, I think, and I found that at Transition Extreme. I found the people there that like encouraged me to look at life differently, to do things differently, like the culture that you're talking about, the anti-establishment, the fuck it to the man, like that whole approach to life. And then just building my network of true relationships and friendships there, and just some other mad stuff. And I met my first girlfriend there, and yeah, she introduced me to the whole kind of outdoor scene, and obviously coming out, which is a huge part. And then I also, my first flatmate at 18 was this guy called Youngo, who I'm pretty sure the Scottish skate scene will know pretty well. Like a long live Livy, like mad bastard. And the flat was owned by Clara and Anna Dawson, whose house I actually live in just now, so tied me to the whole Aviemore crew. And so, like, you know, the lines of that start to, you know, the world starts to become super small now. And yeah, so going from Loreto to living your first flatmate being Ian Young, concrete skate parks, like,
yeah,
you know, I'm pretty sure I got sat down and made to watch the Zeitgeist a couple of times.
Yeah. Yeah, well, those are the formative experiences, aren't they? Yeah. I mean, it makes a lot of sense because, you know, conversations we've had about your approach to activism over the years, just as mates, you know, like just chatting about this stuff. Because, you know, we like to get on the phone and have a rant about a few things quite often, and try and work things out as well. And one of the things that really comes across when I always chat to you is the fact that you really try and place community at the heart of your activism. You know, like through the work that, and through how. Because, you know, we should say you're general manager of Protect Our Winters UK, as well as wearing all these different hats. Like, you know, the as a writer, as, you know, you're a TV presenter as well. You do work with Patagonia. You know, you do all these different things. But there's a theme that runs through what you do, which is about the importance of community, but also like an inclusive vision of community, which sounds like a very obvious thing to say, but I mean, like harnessing that power for positive change, right? Is that sort of fair to say? Because that is something you've been really consistent with, and you definitely, you know, obviously take the work that you do, Protect Our Winters, like really, really seriously, and you try and ground it in belief. You know, like that's clear. You can really see that, and that belief that you have, I think, from the outside does appear to be this community thing. So it's really interesting to hear you kind of talk about where that came from. You know, is that about the size of it?
Yeah, I think so. Like, I think that's, yeah, like, it's a fairly accurate, like, assessment, I guess. And so I think there's two folds there. You know, like the exclusivity of the former years of my education, and seeing the disconnect between, you know, real life and that. But then, yeah, I guess, you know, like, activism without community is fucking pointless. You know, like, and we see it all the time, right? We see it. It comes out as, or I think it manifests itself as like Instagram activism and like workshop activism and the holier than thou fucking, you know, type of activism, which is very about one's self, I think.
Yeah, it's a personal journey story. You know, it's like, that's so funny that you say that, because I was actually chatting to a friend of mine, ours, today about this very topic, and it leads to this wider conversation that you alluded to earlier when you said, it's been a head foot last few weeks. And there's this whole debate obviously going on at the minute across the whole world around, you know, diversity, but also very specifically in our little world, there's a big debate about it and how much we should engage in it, you know, and it's kind of been through the lens of this Nicholas Muller story as well. And yeah, it's one of the things we were talking about, me and my friend Alex, like, yeah, you know, like so much of it is this personal journey story, isn't it? You know, like, which is kind of fine to a point, but then equally it does just become very self-indulgent, if you're not careful, because it becomes about, you know, the best communicators in that world are the people that, they've got, I mean, everyone's got that personal story, everyone's got that epiphany, that thing, but the best people who are the ones that have harnessed that's not the whole story. They've harnessed that to tell a bigger story.
Totally. And I think, like you say, like, very quickly it becomes quite self-indulgent, and then therefore to me quite exclusive. And I maybe because I'm so sensitive to exclusivity, it's something that I actively try and prevent as much as possible, because that version of activism to me, like, it just doesn't resonate with me at all, you know, like it just doesn't resonate. But like that and maybe it's the west coast of Scotland, and maybe that more like grassroots, groundswell, like Red Clydeside, like, you know, like that real, like, you know, that version of accessible activism is the stuff that makes me sit up and go, all right, okay, yeah. You know, like whether you're carrying around a reusable straw or not, you know, like, and the journey you got to there is, for me, seems a wee bit shallow, and then just always having to put your personal spin on it, and rather it just be like, you know, a more inclusive vision for a better world, not just your vision. And so I think it's a harder job to do, because it takes time and reflection, and you actually have to roll your sleeves up and be prepared to put the work in. But it's something that, or it's a type of activism that I think is a lot more effective, and is a lot more inclusive and resonates generally more with me. And I'm not saying that's right, and you know, there might be other people that do go in there, but I just find it's not for me.
Do you think that you described it as Instagram activism, you know, do you think that is kind of symptomatic of the level of debate in our little world? You know, the fact that is kind of where the discussion is taking place.
Yeah, so like, I'm not trying to single out activism in terms of, you know, like on Instagram. I think Instagram can be a healthy place to debate these things and talk about these things. You know, it could be quite a healthy medium. Sometimes it could be an incredibly unhealthy medium, depending on how it's being used.
I mean, I guess it's interesting when you talk about these issues in terms of our little, I keep saying our little world, and what I mean by that is like outdoor and action sports. And the reason I keep using that phrase, I've been using it a lot recently, is because I think this debate that's ongoing has kind of revealed like how far behind the mainstream pace of the debate we are. You know, like a lot of the things that are being debated now are like, you know, pretty mainstream ideas, and they've been like well worked through and well, you know, argued and analysed to death for literally decades, you know. But like we're belatedly discovering it in action sports and outdoors, and you can kind of see that in the response to the recent stuff. And I guess the reason I also picked up on your thing about class and golf, you know, immediately you said, oh, you know, but I've always thought there's loads of parallels between golf and like action sports. You know, they're massively exclusive, they're massively white, they take loads of money, you wear silly clothes, you know, it's all about the kit, it's got loads of arcane lingo that you need to be, you know, there are the little safe spaces that you can only get into if you know the right codes and you've got the right stuff. I think everybody would accept that class is a huge factor in golf, but for some reason people really seem reluctant to accept that it's a huge factor in action sports and outdoor, which seems very odd to me, really, because I feel like for me it seems like quite an obvious thing to say, but people just see, you know, whenever you make a point like that, people are like, oh God, don't bring that into it. We just do these things because we love it. But you would never get, I don't think, anyone in golf claiming that class wasn't a part of it and saying, well, we only play golf just because it's fun and don't start bringing class into it.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, and I think that's why we're becoming so triggered right now in our little world, to use that phrase, and because I think we're a lot more conservative than we give ourselves credit for. You know, like I think, you know, snowboarding, action sports, you know, it's a lot about, you know, competition and consumerism, and you know they're quite core. You know, if you're going to be quite pessimistic about it, you know, that has taken a lot of the forefront, and those things are massively conservative. So, you know,
yeah, and it's at odds with the whole like, hey, we're free thinkers, and
yeah,
and we're, you know, like we like we're live and let live, and you know, culturally we're you know, and it's again it's a bit of an age old conversation, but I think obviously the roots of these cultures were in that countercultural, like non-conservative areas. I think at some point they definitely were anti-mainstream, they definitely were countercultural, but I would completely agree with you. I think if you look at it now, they are massively conservative and mainstream. And you're right, when you look at the reaction to things like Black Lives Matter or, you know, whatever it is, like anything that impinges on that from the outside world, yeah, like, you know, you use the word triggered, like,
Yeah.
it really reveals the conservatism in the culture to a pretty alarming degree, really, I think.
Yeah. Well, you know, that obviously still exists because there was pockets of these like local legends when I started skateboarding, for example, that were like, come here, hen, like, well, you know, we'll teach you what it's all about, you know, and there's obviously those kind of local legends that do really, I mean, authentically live the lifestyle, for air quotes or whatever, you know. But when you package and sell the lifestyle, you know, like you've got to like you've got to also reap the consequences that comes along with that. And I think I think that is infiltrated by materialism and consumerism and competition. And, you know, competition comes in many forms. I'm not just talking about winning the gold medal, you know, like that whole exclusivity around it, whether that be in creative spaces, whether that be in, you know, whatever, you know, any aspect. And so, you know, when the mirror is held up for us to you know, help us analyze, you know, what's going on and how are we going to respond to this, and we think of ourselves as this free thinking, fuck the system, radical, free radical thinking. And, you know, the comments under the White Lines post shows you that's not, you know, that's definitely, you know, we've got a lot of work here, and I don't think that's really at the core. And I've been thinking about this a lot recently as well, you know, because, you know, like the work that I do at Protect Our Winters is obviously about creating a better world. You know, it's about getting to net zero as quickly as possible, you know, because we are skyrocketing towards environmental destruction. You know, there's no beating about the bush about that anymore. We are like skyrocketing towards a 3 to 4 degree world, which, by the way, is catastrophe. It's complete. It's impinging, you know, human life on Earth. You know, it's extinction. You know, like that's what Extinction Rebellion have really been hammering home. And so, you know, when I go and have these conversations about the climate change, in some pockets of the community, it's kind of like, fuck it, you know, like, yeah, don't bring that in here. It's kind of like, you know, live and let live, and let's just, you know, like, fuck the politics and whatever. But, you know, I can't think. And so it kind of, I get that pushback, right? I get called out, I get pushed back, people try and humiliate me sometimes, you know, because they're projecting whatever emotions they're going through, and, you know, it's taken me a long time to figure that out, you know, which kind of hurts sometimes. And so you're kind of like, you know, that the conversation's evolving, my knowledge is increasing, you know, like you learn how to have these conversations. But like, if we were really that culture, I can't think of anything more than climate change that is so fuck the system. Do you know what I mean? Because like everything is going to have to change. Everything.
Yeah.
Like everything. Public health, transport, like banking and financial systems, you know, taking down like big banks, banking differently. You know, the way that, yeah, we grow our food and agriculture, like every touch point in society is going to have to be...
There's a real opportunity to be genuinely revolutionary.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's going to have to be revolutionary. So if we are actually championing these alternative and revolutionary alternatives, then like, where are we? You know, like,
I completely agree, and I really you know, it kind of chimes with your take on the conspiracy theory thing as well, which we discussed. And it's the reason why the Mueller thing is such a fascinating lens through which to examine so many different things, like his own apparent issues notwithstanding, and should be sensitively dealt with. But if you look at it from that point of view, you know, like your point about conspiracy theories is like basically being like lazy, privileged thinking, because if you look at the real world, climate change, as you say, like modern slavery, like female trafficking,
Yeah.
you could pick a million issues that are real and that are horrendous and that speak to the same kind of suspicion of authority and abuse of authority and all these things that are like truth seeking, like all these themes which is supposedly at the heart of like all your conspiracy theories, but which are basically based upon like pretty lazy thinking around stuff that is pumped out on the internet. But if you actually put that energy towards the many real issues, that the world's bad enough, you don't need to make shit up.
Yeah, totally. And that was the text that I sent you, like, you don't need fantasy to make this any fucking worse than it is. Like, don't come and lecture me about celebrity paedophile rings. Like, there's hundreds of, there's tens of thousands of girls that are being trafficked right now in the UK. That's the shit that you can help, that you can go and turn up to your, local rape charity crisis centre and donate and help and support. And for me, that's where it kind of gets my back up, because it evades us of all the civic responsibility that we have. And
it just becomes you get to pretend you're the fearless truth seeker. All this stuff that gets spoken about when people propound these theories, but without any of the actual responsibility to make anything change or because it's just a self-perpetuating circle of what it is. But meanwhile, all the very real injustices and horrible things that are going on in the world just are going unchallenged.
Yeah.
But apart from the ways they are being challenged, but you know what I mean? Like it's.
Well, I can't change the system if I think it's run by fucking lizards, can I?
No.
And so for me, that's where I get my back up a bit. It's like I can't, and to change the system is hard work. It's hard fucking work. You've got to organise.
It's quite boring work.
It's really boring work. You've got to organise and mobilise and strategise, and you've got to have difficult conversations, Like, movement building is 90% tedious calls and Zoom meetings. I would probably say 5% backing back and forth Google documents. 5%, and the other, 4% begging people to give you resources for nothing because you've got no budget. And then 1% or 2%, whatever we've got left, is the actual protest. That's what actual community organizing looks like. And that's the work that needs to be done to go and influence change. That's the real boring hard work, and that's the work that we're prepared to do at Protect Our Winters on behalf of the snow sports or action sports community. But we also need some help. We need you guys to champion these ideas, because I can't think again of skiing and snowboarding or snowboarding, any more obvious sport or leisure activity that affects so obviously, climate change affects so obviously than snowboarding, or snow sports. So, I think I obviously don't know Nicholas, but it's been interesting watching these conversations unfold, and I think we just need to, we need to mature a bit, and we need to have the emotional intelligence to navigate these quite sensitive topics sensitively. And I think now we are in a crossroads, and I think we're going to have to workshop our way out of this to I think pull or push or use our community as a force of good, because in the same week that we're falling in and falling out at each other about the conspiracy theory topics and what's that the wider conversation that's been transcending into, it's the same week that Marcus Rashford, all right, he's got 7 million followers on Instagram, but just saved over 1 million British school children from going starving by using his influence, by turning up to the corridors of power and being like, sort this the fuck out now. Because I've got my privilege and my fans and my sponsors all watching you right now, and you're about to let, over 1 million school children go starving in the school holidays, and I'm not going to let that happen.
Yeah.
So
no, it's a great point, and it's like it's probably the most effective piece of activism we've seen in this country for a long time, and it's so fascinating that it's by a footballer, and also, like you say, somebody that used his agency and his platform. I say footballer just because obviously they do hold this unique position in our culture in the UK.
Yeah, of course.
Like lionized and demonized, scapegoats for everything that's wrong with society when it suits politicians. So for somebody in his position to like I say, use his platform and agency so effectively is really like incredible and unusual.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it just makes the childishness of what's being discussed in our world really, it's really makes it evident, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The fact that like you can use these conversations and these platforms to actually make quite a large difference.
Yeah, totally. And you find alliance in the most unusual places, and I think people are finding that, especially in the UK and Scottish context. We were turning up and like, hey, my name's Laura MacCallum and I'm the general manager of Protect Our Winters. You're at this big COP26 movement. We want to stop North Sea oil and gas drilling. We want to campaign for a commitment to an end date, whether that be maximum barrel extraction or an actual end date, like date and time. We're a bunch of like people that like to go outside and do standing sideways and mountain biking, whatever. But anyone else up for it? And like everyone. And it's just awesome, like big NGOs. We've found alliance with like Friends of Scotland. They've been amazing, and all these different faith groups and like the whole civic society that we're just like, okay, like we don't exist in a vacuum anymore. We're here. Our industry depends on this. Our shared identity depends on this. Our culture depends on this. So we've got too much to lose, and we're here. We think this is what we want. Can we join ties and do this together? And through that, like it's just amazing the friends and the connections that you make just under a common cause and a common fight, really.
Well, what was really also striking about Rashford's approach was it was consensus building. It was so inclusive. It wasn't like, hey, you Tory scumbags, feed the kids.
Yeah.
It was really considered and really calculated, and it brought everybody in, didn't it? It was like, hey, everybody, we should all solve this. Doesn't matter what he even said like this is beyond politics and ideology.
Yeah.
It was so well done and so considered. It was, it's just a total object lesson in activism anyway, but also how to use a platform like that for good, right? Like it really was. Yeah,
and like sport as a vehicle for change, and I think sport has got a massive part in that, and I think if you think about it, like, the sense of community, the shared identity, the shared experiences, the rituals, and the language and the hand signs, and like all that sort of stuff, like, and I guess the empathy when it doesn't go your way, or just literally navigating difficult terrain, like that needs coordination and trust and this sort of things. We can easily lift that out of our little world and apply that alternative thinking, those experiences, to quite mainstream problems, and be quite effective in helping tackle those mainstream problems, which, by the way, affects us. We're not in some sort of silo. So when you say leave these issues out of snowboarding, like, that is just such or action sports, I just think it's such a privileged standpoint to come from, because this is the real issues that are going on around you require us to step up and require us to tackle them head on.
Well, that's why, I don't want to bag anyone, but I did a post on Instagram where I sort of asked why the snowboard media weren't covering Nicholas thing and the diversity thing, and that's kind of exactly what I was getting at. You know, like some of the responses that I got privately were very much, you know, we're just here to build up snowboarding. Like we're basically making the point that it should be non-political. You know, like we're you know, we're just it's just about snowboarding. And I was just a bit like, really? Like, how? Like, if there's one thing this story proves, it's that this isn't that is the opposite of that. You know, like that there are times when you do need to use this platform and agency that you've got as somebody in the media or an athlete's got. You know, if that's being abused, it needs to be investigated. And like you say, it doesn't have to be a witch hunt. It's just a sensitive. The key word is like, you know, be sensitive about it, be considered. Same if you're the media, you know, like just to say, well, we just don't go there. I just thought was really, not only, I just felt it really represented a lack of understanding of actually what the power of that role could be, you know, and like what the power to kind of affect positive change, what an opportunity that was, and how it was being just fluffed really. And I just found it quite alarming, because which is kind of why I posted what I did, because it's just a bit like, oh wow, like we have got, if you don't even recognize that there's a long way to go here, you know, really.
Yeah.
And I guess another question I wanted to ask you on that was, you know, you mentioned earlier specifically on the climate change thing that you've been attacked personally. You know, you said you've understood sometimes that can be projection because people are uncomfortable, which is definitely something I also experienced last week. Is that getting better? Do you think people are more open in the case of climate change to consider this, or do you still think people want that separation of political and non-political?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think people are more open to it. I would say slightly, but I think, you know, there's still a lot of work to do, and I think, you know, like, but I think normalizing these conversations and not and teaching ourselves to have these conversations sensibly, you know, like, again, it comes back to the whole like free thinking thing, you know, like if we just argue with each other on Instagram about you fucking flew to Geneva and you did this and you did that, like, it's so conformist, you know, like us infighting about all this sort of stuff and calling each other out and whatever, like, it's so conformist, you know, like, because we're just taking the heat off the actual issues. So I think sometimes, and maybe people in their I'm going to call it like their activist journey experience, sometimes because they arm themselves with a new knowledge and a new language, they go around and they attack people with it and patronize people with it, and that's not okay too, you know, like that's that. I kind of talked about that whole thing of like woke-splaining, although I don't know in the current context anymore if that's a great word to use, but you know, like you know, like that whole idea of just like environmental splaining to people, you know, and calling them out. And actually, if you don't know anything about climate change, if you don't know anything about these issues, like, that's okay. That's why Protect Our Winters exists. We're here to educate you about these issues. And so I think it's people get defensive because we're challenging their mindset around the issues. We're challenging the way that they construct and live their lives. We're challenging their ethics and their beliefs and their principles around some of the decisions that they're making. And then we're, I guess, kind of challenging potentially inaction and apathy, potentially. And we're not doing that in accusatory, you know, like we're going to bash on, we're going to do this, you know, we're doing this anyways. So it would be great if you could like come with us and help us and support us and add your voice to that, because that's what's going to make the movement more diverse and deeper and broader, and you know, like but you know, I generally get it. Boomers fucking hate me. You know, I've had some dingers. You know, I get trolled on Instagram and, well, you know, whatever. But it just comes as
Well, we did that Type 2 live thing for Patagonia, and you got quite trolled in that, didn't you? There was a guy that was like, "Who the fuck's this bird?" sort of thing,
Yeah.
you know. And I just thought again, it was interesting because I didn't get it. It was you that got it, you know.
Yeah, and you know, like it doesn't happen in the whole patriarchal system. You know, like me and Dan Yates, so Dan Yates, who has Save Our Rivers, you know, we do quite a lot of talking together, and like I've actually been at talks where something that I've been chatting about, which is my areas of expertise. Obviously, Dan's is dams and hydro, and they'll actually ask Dan the question, and Dan will be like, "Well,
I noticed it in Norway last year. I did just speak over you, just proving the point that we're talking about. But I noticed it last year though when you were presenting and somebody spoke over you and deferred to somebody, a male voice.
yeah,
You know, and like I was a bit like, wow.
Yeah.
You know, and to be fair to the person that was running that conference, they did call that out. But yeah,
which was
is
really
that you know, as you mentioned, you're a gay woman in a predominantly male, very white male industry. Like, is that a consistent theme? Like having to work harder to have your voice heard?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I don't mean that in like some sort of like, oh, I'm so oppressed and my voice is so, you know, siloed or like whatever. I don't mean it, but like in that way. But, you know, I've had some horrific things sent to me from members of our community over the years that would, right now probably make, make people's hair stand on edge. But, you know, I think it just comes back to this conversation that we're having. Like, what is the world? Like, we get the scene we make, right? We get the scene we make. So when we don't call out racism, when we don't call out homophobia, when we don't elevate gay, trans, LGBT, female voices, we get a racist, homophobic, white narrative, you know? And so, you know, and it's been actually really nice hearing you over the last kind of episodes, you know, apologize you about the stuff around Terrier, because, you know, it hurts. You know, like it hurts when your mates chat to these people and, you know, wherever it's a joke, but, you know, you walking down the street with your wife, you've never been spat at and called a fucking faggot, have you? You know, like I was like, and this is alive and well in Scotland and the UK today, you know, and so, you know, just even just before the lockdown, me, my girlfriend Kat were in Edinburgh, and this guy spat at us and was like, fucking dykes, you know, and so that's the world we get when we don't call that shit out. Like, that's what it produces. And I think maybe we need to accept now that we get the scene that we make. We get the Scotland we make.
Yeah, and
we have a responsibility to make a better one. You know?
Yeah, and that's why I did go into that in the last episode, and also why, because I think like you can be well intentioned, but also contribute to the status quo that you think you decry.
Yeah.
And I think that's really, really subtle.
Yeah.
And I realise, and that's why in the Phil episode I was kind of banging on about the gap, you know, like the gap between an overt racist and somebody who thinks they're very liberal, and in that center these things can flourish. And I think that example that you raised with me and Terry is like perfect example, because I had all the reasons in the world why I did that,
mm-hmm.
but ultimately it still communicated an impression that was fine. And equally, the people, and again, I'm not trying to bag on people by mentioning this again. I just think it's so emblematic. Like the people that got back to me about the Nicholas thing and said, we're not going to talk about it because we're worried about him. That is a completely understandable impulse, and like and I'm sure it was really well meaning, but the fact of the matter is, what has been spoken about is very, very toxic and damaging. And by not addressing it, you are effectively sending a signal, again, that it is acceptable, and that if you're a famous enough person with enough privilege, you don't get challenged upon that. And there's two examples there, one involving me and one involving, and I think they come from the same place. I think they come from it's well-meaning, but ultimately it's not good enough, because, as you say, and as like it still communicates something, and it still communicates something which is damaging. And I think that speaks also to this fragility word that you used earlier and that I used in the last episode as well. Like, to even point that out is really difficult for people to accept, and like really difficult for people to, you know, that's why you get all lives matter. And, you know, because ultimately it is a hard thing to hear, isn't it? You know, like, I'm not that person. I don't think that. It's like, and you know, I had a debate with a friend of mine about the Nicholas thing, and she didn't really she kind of had a go at me. She was like, "You're attacking him. It's not on." I was a bit like, oh, okay, I really don't think I'm attacking him.
Yeah.
And she was like, "I don't think what he says is anti-Semitic." And I was a bit like, well, I think you probably need to do a bit more research then. And then when I explained it to her, she was like, "But he can't mean it." And I was a bit like, "But he said it.
Yeah.
He's been saying it for weeks." And it's the same thing. Like, that's what is important here. This what's being said and what's being communicated. And if you don't, as you put it, if you don't like address that with a sensitive conversation, that's going to keep flourishing, and that's not going to change.
Exactly. And like, you know, yeah, it's not going to change, and you and the byproducts of that are, in this case, you know, and these things going unchallenged and unchecked is, you know, is examples like Thierry, and maybe in this example Nicholas, and that sort of thing. And I think, you know, that's where we need to come together and kind of be like, right, how are we going to navigate, you know, because like I've said, a witch hunt, and what we've both said, a witch hunt is not good for anyone's mental health. We've seen that play out in the media, where it's had, you know, life-ending consequences, you know. So how are we maturely going to tackle these issues when this comes up, because they've been unchecked and unchallenged? These are the byproducts of that happening, and how then now are we going to confront it and challenge it in a constructive a way? And I think that's something that the industry, the brands, the team managers, the media, the NGO, you know, us, we all need to kind of get around the table and I think workshop this shit out, because
have the conversations. Yeah. You know, like, it's not a binary position. It's not you either support this or you're against it. It's complicated.
Yeah.
It's nuanced.
Yeah.
And you should be able to, if you're good at communicating, which after all is supposed to be everybody's job in marketing and the media, you should be able to hold that space. Explore that complicated position of like, well, here's this issue which we might want to consider because there's safeguarding and there's an individual involved or whatever it is, you know, but equally here's this position. So, you know, it shouldn't be binary. Like you say, it doesn't have to be either or.
No.
But I think, you know, it comes back as well to what you mentioned earlier, which is a really, really good point about how you know, it's hard to say this sort of stuff without being really patronizing, but how you do like help people learn and understand why these issues are important, and without shaming people. Yeah. So important. You know, I read a great quote earlier from Elvis Costello, the secret to the first rule of political pop is don't tell them it's political, you know, like, and I think I've been staggered really the last couple of weeks by how much work there is to do on that area. And that's not on anyone, you know, that doesn't know about this stuff. I just think it's you've got to really, really seek it out and actively want to know it. And, you know, I think like to help people sort of get up to speed with the kind of with what's actually going on and how to approach this stuff sensitively is actually quite a huge amount of work, and is I think why brands are being quite rightly criticised for not leading on that, really.
Yeah, and we just it's okay. It's okay. It's okay if you don't know. It's okay to hold your hands up and say, "Listen, I don't know. Sorry, I'm late to the table." No, you're never too late to the table. Actually, fuck that. Everyone's got to start somewhere. You don't know what you don't know. You can't experience or you can't embody what you've never experienced. And that's okay. And I think so many people are quick to jump the gun and blame people and shame people and whatever else. But like no one has ever changed anyone's mind by shaming them. Like no one has. And embarrassment, shame is such a powerful emotion, and we can probably think we probably all have a memory that's very vivid about us being embarrassed or shamed, and it probably will be at primary school or something. It would be quite deep seated, that is quite traumatic. So, and maybe this is again what I've seen at Loreto, being in these educational institutions, shaming people over lack of perceived knowledge, and this is another thing that I've really loved over the last few years, especially coming to the Highlands. Like, knowledge is not academia. I'm not an academic person. I would say I'm an intelligent person, but I'm not an academic person. Those two things are completely separate. And I know people who are quite academic, but lack a lot of intelligence around around a lot of these issues. So, shaming people, calling people out in that way where where they're trying to learn or trying to do better, we have to be careful about how we do that. We have to rightly call the things out that need called out, but again, then what's the solution after that? What's the alternative? Because if you don't have the alternative, then shut up. Like if you don't have alternative to the solution, like that's and again, I guess it comes back to the whole conspiracy theory thing. Okay, well, what are you going to do about it? Right? What are you going to do about it? Like I don't know. I live in the Highlands, and I was speaking to my friend Jack about this as a dry stone diker. Jack's like, I'm a fucking dry stone diker, like living in the Highlands of Scotland. Like, what do you want me to do about the Illuminati? All I could do is influence what's around me, and that's wash my fucking hands, stay at home, and just try and make life less shit for other people. And I was like, here, brother. We can, what can we influence, and what's the alternative? And I think, again, like we get the scene we make, like, well, and sometimes I've used language like, let's take people with us, and it can be kind of patronizing. Like, no, we have to now come up with alternatives. We have to come up with alternative solutions. What are those? What do they look like? What do they feel like? How do we communicate them? How do we get people on board with them? How do we take that from the action sports community and take it to the mainstream, so people understand where we're coming at this, or the lens that we're applying to these issues. And we need to mobilize and do that work now, because this calling out without solutions is just really unhelpful, I think. And it's not going to get us anywhere, and we don't have time to sit and fuck around now either. In terms of, I'm just going to talk in terms of the climate crisis, but we have to get a move on. Like, this is, the science is screaming at us, and we need to start tackling that, now. We don't have time to sit around now and debate about whether it's real or not, or how that whether it should be in or out of politics, or in or out of snowboarding or action sports, whatever. Like, we just need to get on with it now.
So where can people find out more about the work you're engaged in on that?
So just Instagram, Protect Our Winters UK, Facebook, our website, just just type in Protect Our Winters UK, and you can see the campaigns that we've got going on. If this comes out before Tuesday the 30th of June, we are running a campaign called The Time Is Now, which is virtually lobbying your MP. So asking your MP to in light of the current COVID-19 situation, to build a better, a greener and fairer future for people and planet. So and we're quite in the middle of those campaigns right now, the sort of Build Back Better movement after COVID, not going back to normal, not maintaining the status quo. So you'll find a lot of information about that on our Instagram, and you'll be able to kind of add your voice to that. And if you're inspired about some of the stuff you're doing, and you're not really sure what to do, there's a lot of infographics on there. We've kind of ranked changes that you can do from sort of green to black. But even if you don't have money to donate or time or whatever, just send your MP or MSP or your local representative an email, and it will take you 15-20 minutes. We've got the templates on the website, but just don't copy and paste it. Just send them an email and say, hey, my name is Matt Barr, I live here, or my name is Lauren MacCallum. I'm a snowboarder, I'm a mountain biker, I spend time in the natural world, here's my experience, what are you doing to tackle climate change in my local constituency? That and let them know that you're scared about the current crisis, and B, you want them to do something about it. And then the time is now, we've got these sort of 5 principles which are the solutions to build in that. So yeah, that's probably the easiest way to sort of get on board.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, show notes, I'll get all the links in there, make sure people can check them out.
Yeah, but yeah, no, it's cool. It's I've been finding these conversations quite interesting. I came into activism in 2013 when Scotland was going through its independence referendum, and the topics that we're having right now about colonialism and about British excellence and about all these topics. I'm not saying I was so progressive because I landed on it first. I just happened to, I was coming up with a lot of these conversations. I was having a lot of these conversations with my friends in 2013, 2014, and challenging my perceptions and challenging, challenging, I guess, my worldview on things. And it's interesting now watching with the Black Lives Matter movement, with the and the conversations that's spurring on within the sort of snowboard and action works, the conversations or the experiences or what that's bringing up for my friends. It's interesting because I feel like I kind of went through that in 2013, and yeah, it's been interesting to sit back and watch.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're not new ideas.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. I mean, I shared a clip on Instagram yesterday of David Bowie in 1985 talking about white privilege to an MTV presenter and asking why there's not more black musicians on MTV, and it's literally the same debate that's going on now. That there's a lot of information out there, and there's a lot of ways of learning more about this, which can help progress the debate, definitely. And I think it definitely behoves everyone who's going to contribute to at least have a little look at that before they do, although it's the internet, so people tend not to do that.
Yeah, and this is so I got into all this because of land reform, right? I was working full time for Snowsport Scotland. I couldn't afford to buy a house because obviously Aviemoore's a very tourist sort of mountain town, if you like. And so second property is rife here, and I was like, well, wait a minute, why is that? Why is everything so inflated? Why can't I afford to buy it anywhere? Why can't I afford to settle? You know, like it's kind of, I felt like this sort of suspended adolescence always been kind of perpetuated into, like felt like I couldn't really like put my roots down anywhere, and, you know, still haven't managed to do that, but like, you know, I started looking into land ownership and who owns Scotland and what do they want to do with it. And holy shit, that just opened up this like whole can of worms, like massive can of worms, you know, and like less than 450 people own Scotland. You know, almost £2 billion of land is registered in offshore account, you know, in offshore tax havens. £4.4 billion worth of property is registered in Scotland to offshore tax havens. And then, you know, starting to connect the dots of how that, you know, in terms of land use and access. So this ties, you know, straight into the Black Lives Matter movement, straight into environmentalism, straight into equality and fairness. And then I think that's kind of, you know, how like Right to Roam came around with Yoder and Marie, and they're like, hey, we heard of this thing called Right to Roam. Like, you ever heard of it? It's like, hope everyone's got a full pint, you know.
Okay, stay there.
Yeah, stay there. Yeah, and like, you know, I remember people used to walk away from me in the pub when I wanted to talk about this shit. You know, because whatever. But I found, you know, a group of people that did foster me through those quite complex things. And I think it was interesting taking snowboarding and taking like land reform, like two completely, well, actually they're really linked, but on the surface might look not like look so linked. And then that kind of, you know, tie those two passions together, which I guess created that film. And then I guess, like, you know, then spurred that on to the more environmental issues, which is, I guess, how I came about with POW. But yeah, it's really difficult, you know, like unpacking this stuff is hard. You know, I think I seen something flying around earlier, like, this is not going to be an Instagrammable moment. You know, like, I used to think the Gaelic language, Scotland's indigenous language, was like a waste of space, like, fucking, you know, what's the fucking point in it? It's a dead language, you know. But like, that is literally like colonized thinking that's been like brought into my brain to reject, you know, the indigenous culture to in the name of progression and profit and empire, you know, like, and a way that I like to describe that is like, and that was quite hard for me to, you know, to like, why do I hold these beliefs, you know, that was quite hard to unpack. And yeah, the way I like to describe it is like, you know, I'm learning Gaelic, and people are like, oh, what's that for? Like, what the fuck do you want to do that for? But if you said, oh, I could speak Latin. I did Latin at, you know, whatever university. Like, oh, it's, you know, it's this, like, oh, great. You must be super clever. You must be super smart. You know?
Well, that's Boris Johnson's grift, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, sprinkle a few Latin quotes in there, and everyone thinks you're really, really clever and to be trusted. Essentially, yeah. Well, you know, what you're saying is really interesting because it, you know, it does link to all this, because it's where the systemic thing comes from.
Yeah.
You know, like, ultimately we are a product of how we've been educated and the things we've been told. And, you know, just as you're talking about that in the context of that issue you just described, it's how, you know, you can see that in the relation in what Phil was talking about in the last episode about his perceived Britishness and like how he's struggled with that his whole life. You know, it's a product of that. You know, it's a product, as you say, of like essentially indoctrination.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, it's the same system. It's the same system that cleared the Highlands, that treated people as disposable, that treated black people as disposable, as, you know, as slaves. It's the same system then, or, you know, that it is now, that it treats the environment as disposable, you know, extractive. And if we don't see ourselves as a part of that, you know, like, I definitely see myself embodied in nature. It's a part of me, you know, it's an extension of me. It's something that sustains me as a human being, the air I breathe, the food I eat, it's very much a part. But that system sees everything as external. So we extract it, we exploit it, and we profiteer off it. And that is, that's the work that we need to do now, and call out that system. And I'm not going to sit here and lecture people. I struggle to watch, read the 24-hour fucking clock. But I'm not going to sit here and lecture people about economics. But the whole free market, colonial capitalism, and treating everything as disposable, and infinite growth. The whole idea of this infinite. We don't live on an infinite. We live on a finite planet. At the moment, we're consuming 2.5 planets. At the rate that we're going, and we only have one planet. So that's what we need to do now. We need to acknowledge that as the oppressive system that treats, humans, people of color, poor people, and exploits them, and come up with a better system that works for all. And that might seem quite fluffy and left and stuff, but it's honestly what we need to do now. That's those radical championing of choices and alternatives that we need to come up with, and the alliances that we need to build now to progress forward. And then obviously also the people who have been marginalised and prosecuted within that system, elevate those voices as much as possible, because they're the ones that are disproportionately affected from that system. So, people of colour, Indigenous people, Global South voices, we need to elevate them as much as possible, because they're the ones who have suffered the most. So, yeah, it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be Instagrammable. It's going to be hard. It's going to be a lot of guilt. It's going to be a lot of emotions that arise, but we have to be okay with them arising, and we have to arm ourselves, I think, with with emotional intelligence to navigate those conversations and those feelings with the right tools, so that we can do that properly and most effectively, I think. And that's quite exciting and liberating place to be in, right? Like it's not going to be all hard work. There's going to be some great moments in that movement building, but we can, without sounding all cheesy, but we can do it. We've got to believe it first. We've got to come up with it first, and then we need to act on it. And that for me is, I find, massively exciting, and it's what I guess keeps me going, because there's a lot of shit in this that definitely doesn't keep me going, but that is the stuff that really, I think will keep me involved in this for a very long time.
When was the last time you played golf?
2009, I think.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I'll probably.
Do you miss it?
No, not really. I might come back to it, when the old knees are done and the back's done. But
yeah.
But yeah, for now it's it's mountain biking and snowboarding, and got the lycras caught up with me eventually. Been out on the road bike a wee bit.
Oh, that happens to everyone.
I know. So yeah.
Again, it's a lot of parallels.
Yeah.
Shiny kit.
I know.
Uniforms, lingo.
Yeah. Which, all adds up to something that can be quite negative, but can all add up to something that can be quite positive, and used as a force for good. And I was actually digging around about that last night, and I'm just fascinated with Scottish people. I think they're just they're just such a breed of fascinating people. But identity doesn't give you virtue. Identifying as a snowboarder because we're whatever, it doesn't give you virtue. It could actually be quite the opposite. And as we're finding, it's now coming with a lot of baggage. small-mindedness and bigotry and whatever else too. You know, like identity doesn't give you virtue, and that's kind of, I guess, what Robert Louis Stevenson was going on about when he was talking about the Scottish accent of the mind, like the Scottish cast of mind, which was a different approach to, I guess, the rest of people in the UK. It was a different approach to law and justice, poetry, mythology, and like it kind of, it grew this different identity, if you like, but that doesn't always, it's not always it could be used in a real positive way, but it also obviously can be used in a real negative way, and we have to use that identity with our shiny kit and our shiny clothes and language and whatever else as force for good.
That's the challenge of the vision you just outlined there, isn't it? And that's where reactionary reactions to what you've just outlined have their power, because it becomes about a threat to that identity, doesn't it? It becomes, so that is that was a really hopeful vision that you outlined, and a really generous vision, and a really all-encompassing and contextual idea of what needs to be done. But people do see that as a threat, don't they, to their existing identity, and that is clearly some fundamental part of human nature that you can see it in the debates about Scottish independence and Brexit. It's about identity. It's about what kind of person am I, and what kind of place do I want to live in. What does that represent, doesn't it? And those hopeful visions can be harnessed by toxic entities, to call it a threat to your identity, can't they? And it is a challenge. You're seeing that with the reaction, as you said, to even try to talk about climate change to some people, and the vociferous reaction on that White Lines post about, hey, we should maybe think about talking about race in the context of snowboarding. It's like a really, really like deep-rooted emotional reaction to that from people, because they did see it as an attack on their identity, basically. That's a huge challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and I think the whole thing about the Scottish independence referendum is like, and Brexit, like people like to draw parallels, but I was, well and thick in the independence referendum, like I was, and you've never seen anything like it, like people turning up at 8 p.m. on a Monday rainy night, swinging from the rafters to call out politicians. Like it was so inspirational to me, because again, maybe because I've educated in these establishments, politics for the political class, right? And I was like, the local postie just totally called out that Labour MP, like, like my friends were having all these like crazy conversations around me, and everyone was becoming their own little expert in whatever that was, whether it was like taxation or defence or land reform or, like all these insane conversations were happening around me. And the thing that scared me the most was that I couldn't join in, and I think that's maybe, again, where I find the exclusivity of activism. If we're not welcoming, if everyone was like, whatever, but people took me by the hand and was like, go and read this, go and do that, go and watch that documentary, and then I would come back and be like, holy shit, did you know that Scotland was like owned by less than 450 people, and the biggest landowner at Glenfeshie, and he's Danish, and actually the Danish have this really progressive taxation law, which means that it's building schools and hospitals and roads back in Denmark, but nothing here in the UK and nothing here in Scotland. How is that fair? Well, I don't know. How is that fair, Lauren? Well, it's not fair. And there you go. Boom, engaged. And that's what those light bulb moments will happen naturally for people in this conversation, whether that be about race, whether that be environmentalism and race, or LGBT rights, or whatever. The sort of those light bulb moments will click for people, but we have to hold space for that to happen, and not be not get up our own arse about it, because this is what,
Yeah.
it could.
And not hold that binary position that we talked about.
Yeah.
Have the chat, have the conversation.
Yeah.
Brings it back to that, why it's important.
And so I guess the difference between the Scottish referendum and Brexit for me was like the right to self-determination to be equal. Like we just want to be a small operating European nation. We don't want to, it's obviously ambitious, but we want to be equal to the member states. We want to, we want to contribute. We want to contribute to the world. But we just want to be, we don't want Britannia rules the waves. What the fuck's that all about? It's not what we're on about. We just want to have the tools in our toolbox to be able to have the right to self-determination. And who am I or you or anyone else to deny that to anyone? And I think the difference between that and the Brexit narrative was it was full of that English exceptionalism and that Britannia rules the waves, what we've kind of seen rhetoric that's been punted out, especially by some pretty dangerous UK media, and so yeah, that like if it was that for me, I don't, and I may be just being a gay woman and being, very, very sensitive or wary about any movement building that is going to not make the lives of people more equal or a better place. Very wary, because there's been a lot of oppression there, and I definitely don't want to put my name to anything. And so yeah, it was I can't actually tell you how revolutionary 2014 was in my life. Like it was revolutionary because I genuinely thought I was a bit sick, because I wasn't academic in a learn knowledge and regurgitate it. That's not how I learn. But what was happening was like people in my local community, and this can happen in snowboarding or any other community, was like, Lauren, like, push her to the front. She, and like, my local community were like, yeah, Lauren, you on you go. And they would like literally nudge me and be like, you say it, you do it, you stand up, people would push me into that, into that out of my comfort zone, essentially. Be like, I can remember standing up in the village hall in Newton Moor for the first time and my hands shaking, and asking what, SNP ministers about what they were going to do about the soaring house prices, that came from the whole land reform debate. And that being pushed out of comfort zone by your community is massively empowering, because that is the solidarity that we all, I think, and the sense of belonging that we all yearn for. That's not based on the superficial. It's based on actual solidarity in the quest to build something better. And like that is something that no brand, no individual can create. It has to come from the swell of people and the desire to do better. And I think we can do that. I think as an action sports community, and you've seen it in surfing, and I think it's slightly different because you get that more custodian, you've had that more historical sort of custodian history within surfing. We've not really had that in say snowboarding or whatever, but I think we can do that. And there's brilliant minds and talent within this industry to do that justice. So we just need to refocus on what actually the fuck matters, and go from there. And we're not going to have to agree. We're not always going to agree. There'll be parts of probably protect our winters and the work that they do that chime with you. There'll probably be parts that definitely don't. But it's the same with, I don't know, independence referendum. There was stuff that chimed with me massively, and stuff I was like, I won't be too quick to run to that defence. But that's just life, isn't it? That's just, we're built with hypocrisy. Being human is just full of inconsistencies and hypocrisies, and it's just owning them, I think, and being wary of them, and not shying away from them, and owning it, and trying to find a solution. Because that's really well, that's what I'm hoping about the conversations that we're having right now within the industry that's come out of, the discussions that we've been having. That's where I'm hoping this is going. I'm hoping that after the initial shock of somebody holding up the mirror and being like, oh fuck, we don't like that. I'm hoping once we kind of get over that, we'll be able to constructively put this work into place.
Yeah, I agree, and it feels like, everyone keeps saying, oh, these conversations are important, but I think I agree. I think it feels like it's happening to me, and I feel like I say, your vision of it's really hopeful and generous, which is great. I think that's what it needs. I think it needs that inclusiveness for people to not feel threatened and not feel alienated and not feel like, because they're wrong, they don't have a place. It's as you say, basically, that's fine and that's necessary and that's what we need to embrace, really. So yeah, it's a lovely vision.
Yeah, and if we don't have that vision, then where is this going? And I've said this a million times before, but if snowboarders can't save fucking snowboarding, then what hope do we have? No one's going to do this work for us. We have to do it ourselves. So we have to roll up our sleeves and get it done. And maybe that might be a bit flippant and a bit accusatory. It doesn't mean to be, but it's we are the custodians of this. We are responsible for where this is going, and stepping into that responsibility now is really, I think what we need, what we can do, and I think I'm hoping it will happen. And yeah, there's more collaboration, more support, more patience, more understanding, and again, it comes back to the system thing. This is going to be a revolution. This has to be revolutionary. And, a revolution without compassion, a revolution without patience, a revolution without empathy and love, and, not to get all hippie about it, is fascism. And, we know how that movie ends. It's not a great thing. And so if this green movement, let's just
spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert, doesn't end up too well. Without those things at its core, and then let's just say in the green movement, we don't want green fascism. We don't want a green version or the systems that oppress, that have got us to where we are now. If we just swap in with the other, what's the fucking point? If we're not going to make this planet better for human and beast, what's the point? And I think, and I think that needs to be said, and it needs to be reminded. A revolution without understanding and empathy in these things is fascism. So let's just be mindful of that when we move forward, and let's be considered, because words and actions matter.
So there you go. That was me and Lauren, and I hope you enjoyed it. Told you she was a brilliant conversationalist with quite a vision for the role of activism and debate and learning. As usual, you can find full show notes over at my website. That's www.wearelookingsideways.com, which will have links that hopefully provide context to a lot of the stuff we talked about. Big thanks to Lauren for coming on the show and for fitting me in, because I know she's proper busy. So yeah, a few things to talk about in this little instalment of Housekeeping Corner. First up, which is pretty funny, which is that a good 6 weeks after the episode, Derek Riley at Beach Grit obviously got round to listening to my episode with Chaz Smith and was moved to cover the episode and the podcast on Beach Grit itself. Yep, hallowed ground has been attained. I've had the piss taken out of me on Beach Grit. Feels a little like what I imagine making your first appearance in Sood's Corner in Private Eye feels like. to be fair, despite getting my name wrong and referring to me as Matt Burr throughout, I still can't quite work out if that's a genuine mistake or a genius example of offhand dismissal. A bit like when Diego Maradona magisterially said, "Who is Butcher?" when asked what he thought about Terry Butcher's comments on the hand of gods, which I think you'll agree is one of history's great put-downs. Anyway, I digress. Despite the fact that he got my name wrong, I think they went pretty easy on me, really. And let's be honest, I did ask for it with that whole thing I said in the intro about the website being the surfing version of the topless volleyball scene in Top Gun. That analogy, let me just say, gets him every time. It winds him up every single time. Anyway, that little piece is on the Beach Grip website if you fancy a look. If you don't, I wouldn't blame you. I did have a very funny conversation. This is going to be quite a name drop with Dave Rastovich when I interviewed him for Type 2, and he said, well, I said to him, so have you listened to any episodes of the podcast? And he said, I listened to your interview with Chaz Smith, actually. I thought I'd better check it out and see what you're up to. I was like, all right, what do you reckon? He's like, well, I'd never heard of Beach Grit. I was like, what did you think? He's like, well, I went and had a look. Imagine spending your life doing that, which I think pretty much covers my views on Beach Grit. But anyway, have a look, see what you think. I've actually got Derek Riley coming on the show because the first thing I did after I saw that was email him and say, well, come on then, let's get you on here and have a chat about it. So that's what we're going to do at some point. So keep an eye out. Elsewhere, well, what a response to my episode with Phil Young, and also my housekeeping corner comments about, well, a lot of different things, including the Nicholas Muller saga. Far too many comments to go into here, but thanks to each and everybody who's been in touch with their considered views, criticism, feedback, all the rest. It's all very welcome and appreciated. If you follow me on Instagram over at We Look Sideways, you'll know that I tend to continue the conversation post-episode through my Instagram stories. That's probably the easiest way to contact me, actually, if you've got any feedback or criticism or whatever. And there's always a really nice dialogue that goes on through Instagram stories, so if you want to get involved with that, go and have a look. Had a lot of people saying how brave they thought I was for copping the criticism of my Terrier and Muller episodes on the chin, a little bit like I did with Lauren in this episode. But let's be honest, I'm so ridiculously privileged doing what I get to do for a living that I think calling it brave is a bit much as I appreciate the sentiment. It's all part of the game and process, if you ask me. On the Nicholas thing, I did end up posting about that on Instagram, as I think I mentioned again in this chat with Lauren. And as I explained, I basically called out the media for not covering it. The response to that, and also the response to the thoughtful stories subsequently posted on White Lines and Empora, really did show me just how far we've got to go before we can have any type of debate beyond there's no such thing as racism in snowboarding because everybody is covered up all day, which is an actual real life comment that I assume an adult left on the White Lines post on Instagram. So yeah, the scales continue to fall from my eyes on just how much work there is to be done when it comes to education guests and the exploration of concepts that can help further the debate, which, as I said last episode, I'm going to keep trying to do through the podcast. On the Nicholas story itself, I just think, the last week has just confirmed to me that I do think it's probably the most revealing and important snowboarding story of the last 20 years, really, given what a mirror it holds up to the issues in snowboarding and at large. And I do include the issues. There's a lot of speculation about what's going on with Nicholas. There's a lot of people that seem to think that there's a safeguarding issue at play. That is a totally legit angle on this. Like I say, there's so many layers to it. Endless angles on this one. And like I said to Lauren, I've been truly amazed that people of power and influence in the media either don't see that or don't know where to start covering it. I mean, that in itself is hugely revealing about some of the systemic problems we've got in our industry. Somebody said to me, well, I didn't know how to cover it, so I didn't. I was a bit like, well, you could find somebody who could cover it. Groundbreaking, I know. Didn't make myself that popular saying that stuff online, but I did think it needed saying, so I said it. So yeah, let's see how that one unfolds, really. In my newsletter this week, I did post a couple of links to what I thought were very interesting stories that contextualize the whole thing further, if you want to check that out. So me appearing on other podcasts update. I often get asked by listeners to be a guest on this show, because it is a thing in podcasts, like hosts appearing on their own shows as guests. I mean, it's never going to happen, because I think podcasters appearing on their own show is proper sharp jump-in territory myself. But that's just me. But that said, I don't mind going on other people's podcasts, which I've been doing a bit of recently. And I'm very honoured to be the first guest on a new podcast called Active Minds, which is about mental health and related issues. It's a long old chat between myself and my old friend and presenter Dave Jordan about growing up in Manchester, how I ended up doing this ridiculous job, the importance of female role models, why this story you tell your kids during a divorce is crucial, and loads of other stuff. Have a search for Active Minds wherever you get your podcasts. I probably will post about it on Instagram over at We Look Sideways, so you could have a look at it there. But yeah, have a listen. Make sure you subscribe. Dave's a great interviewer. I think he's really onto something with this format and topic. So Active Minds, have a look. All right, there you go. That actually turned into quite a long housekeeping corner, didn't it? Anyway, thanks for checking this one out. I'll be back next week. Nice one.